hope you're having a fabulous day. Thank you for dropping by. August is Motility Awareness Month, which means basically awareness for parts of your GI tract that doesn't work properly. And one of my illnesses does fall into this category, so I figured I'm going to do a video on this today. Really quick though, in case you guys hear like a turning noise in the background, I am running saline fluid, so it is just my pump. So just in case you hear that, I'm very excited though. I was able to access myself 110% by myself for the first time today. Super excited about that. For anybody who doesn't know, accessing just basically means, in the simplest terms that I can put it in, is I stuck the needle into my own port properly and it is all working. My nurse was here and checked it, so very excited about that. Anyways, back to the original topic of today's video. So several diseases fall into the category of digestive tract paralyzation, which is a really big term, complicated. So some of these diseases include gastroparesis, chronic intestinal pseudo-obstruction, and colonic hernia or something. I know I'm pronouncing at least the last one incorrectly. I'm really sorry. If you have that disease, you can tell me in the comments how to say it properly, because I'm not sure. I do really feel like though, because a lot of these diseases are really rare, that when you're doing an initial search, they don't always come up. So I do have the feeling, and correct me if I'm right or wrong, that there probably are a couple other diseases that fall into this category. So personally, I have gastroparesis, like I said, but I also have lost, we found out in June when I was in the hospital, I lost motility in my lower intestines. I'm not sure from what point to what point that I don't have motility. No specific tests were ran. However, I am on a medication that allows my stomach to push food through it for the gastroparesis and like kind of speed things up and help it to work and everything. So when I did not have that medication in the hospital, because it's ordered from Canada and my hospital doesn't let you take medication that is prescribed that you get from outside of the United States. So it wasn't on that, and immediately my bowels all shut off, which we thought was a little bit strange because my bowels tend to move extremely quick, especially when I don't feel good and my stomach's flaring up, which was the case in the hospital. Usually I have like severe diarrhea, but everything had stopped working completely, which again, very, very strange. So another doctor who was not my gastro had put 2 and 2 together, thankfully, pretty quickly when he had found out what was going on. And he was like, you know, you don't have your medicine. I think maybe that's part of the problem. He said, maybe you lost motility down in your lower intestines and nobody's caught it yet. So to test out his theory, they put me on Reglan. And I know Reglan is definitely something that you don't usually use for long term, but it was for a couple days in the hospital. And he was able to test out the theory, and I got back all the motility, and I was able to eat a little bit easier. So apparently I've lost motility down further. Anyways, what is gastroparesis? Gastroparesis literally translates into paralyzed stomach. So, and this can be, I guess, a little bit misleading. Some people's is completely paralyzed, the stomach. Other people, it just works slower. So it is on a spectrum. Like every illness or disorder, there's a spectrum. So the stomach has, like I said, a lot of issues pushing down food and basically just working to digest the food. It is very, very difficult. And less commonly, people can have problems digesting liquids. With me, it depends on the day pretty much, and we have found old liquids in my upper endoscopy, so we do think I have some problems at times processing liquids. It's just not a constant issue for me. It is caused by damage to the vagus nerve, and the hallmark symptoms include nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain, bloating, feeling full after a couple bites of food, and loss of appetite. I know for somebody with gastroparesis, I look like I'm on the extreme heavy side. At least that's how I feel. I am a normal weight, but all my weight right now is from steroids. I did say back in, I believe it was May or June. I was on 50 milligrams of prednisone for a couple days and then tapered back down to my normal dose very, very slowly. So this is all still steroid weight. The joys of steroids. So I began having noticeable stomach issues by the age of 6 years old. They really picked up though, like my abdominal issues around 9 years old, where I missed about half the school year and I was on homebound because of it. A lot of abdominal pain. They're always rushing me to the ER thinking that I had appendicitis or, you know, something was really, really wrong, something collapsed. I was really underweight for quite some time. I don't really know like from what age to what age, but I was underweight. I struggled a lot with my weight. Nobody really said much about it, you know, like none of my doctors were super concerned. They just said, oh, she's just, you know, underweight. Some kids are underweight and that's just reality. And they gave me basically Ensure to help me put on weight. I just remember bringing it to school. I don't really remember if it helped put on weight. It might have a little, but I just remember bringing it to school and like trying to explain to other kids why I had it and they didn't. But then in 2015, so I was, I think about 19 or 20, years and years and years later that I struggled with all of these stomach symptoms. I was finally diagnosed with ulcerative colitis and my family and I figured, okay, this is the answer for all of the stomach issues. And I had really no reason to think otherwise that there was anything else going on, honestly. I just figured, okay, this is what colitis looks like. My colitis, I did notice pretty quickly, my colitis is a little bit different than the average person, but I tend to fit outside of the nice little box that medical people make. I don't usually fit the norm, so I'm usually a little bit different. So last year, my doctor, my GI at the time, had told me, you need to get off prednisone ASAP. There was no medical reason, I assure you, none whatsoever. I was actually starting to get a little bit of stability medically, so which I understand tapering. However, this was, I want to say around April or May, and if it was April, it was pretty late April. And he was like, you need to come off steroids at all costs by June 30th. That is the bottom line, or I will no longer be your doctor, which was enough to scare me and give me plenty of anxiety. I had been on 15 milligrams for well over a year. I want to say a couple years at that point. Yeah, I was like up and down quite a bit with my steroids, but at that point I want to say it was at least 1.5 years to 2 years. But I did get down to 2.5 milligrams of prednisone, which was the biggest mistake that I've ever made, tapering that fast because somebody told me to. I really should not. Looking back, I should not have done that because one morning I woke up in June vomiting nonstop. I'm always exposed to plenty of kids, but I had been around more kids than usual, like over the past couple days leading up to it, family, and I just figured that I had caught a stomach virus, that, oh, you know, one of the kids I was around was a carrier for the stomach bug and I got it. Except for the vomiting never stopped and the diarrhea never stopped. My appetite never came back and everything just kept going downhill. I wasn't able to keep in liquids. So this 24-hour bug that I thought I had emerged into a week, and a week, you know, turned into 2, as it always does. And I quickly got to the point, like I said, that I couldn't eat anything. I was maybe getting in a couple bites of a saltine and downing 1 to 2 packages of little fruit snacks that you get like for the kids in the grocery store. That's what I was living on to take my 2.5 milligrams of steroids and kind of cross your fingers and pray that it stays in, because I knew without it that my body was likely to shut down at that point completely. So eventually I did go to the ER where they ran a couple tests and told me, you know, you're not dying, basically. And they sent me home. Unfortunately, I got worse when I came home, and within a few days, even though I didn't want to, I was fighting with my family that I don't want to have to go back to the hospital. I hate having to go twice in 1 week. It's just not something. I'd rather just deal with the pain and the symptoms than have to go back and deal with doctors who aren't taking me serious and staff that doesn't take me serious. But I ended up going back to the hospital because I was also at this point having pretty intense chest pain. I was having really bad palpitations, trouble breathing off and on, which is definitely not a good thing. And then, of course, all the GI symptoms. So I had, unfortunately, ended up in the cardiac unit in the hospital I was at. I ran into a doctor who was like, oh, well, she just has a fat face. She's just on too much prednisone, and wanted to give me enemas and send me home. Which, of course, at this point, I was just so exhausted from not having nutrition. I was like, look, something needs to be done. Somebody needs to do something. I begged her and like other people on staff. I forget if it was a nurse or a tech, but I reached out to somebody. I was like, look, this doctor is not taking me serious. I need somebody to go call my GI office. Something is going on. Something is really wrong. Please. And finally, somebody called. I don't remember who. Somebody eventually called GI. And thankfully, it wasn't even my doctor who picked up. It was another doctor. And I can't even believe that I say thankfully. But she was appalled when she heard my symptoms. And she's like, you're trying to send this girl home? Home to do what? How is she supposed to function without nutrition? Obviously. So they did I ended up with a different ER doctor. And then I ended up getting admitted. But unfortunately, this was the most stressful hospital admission of my life. Everybody just basically sat there and told me, I don't know what's wrong with you. Something's wrong, but I don't know what it is. I don't know what tests to run. And as the patient, they just got to the point that they were completely overwhelming me with just telling me that, oh, I just don't know what's wrong with you. I'm like, well, just run some sort of test and everything that I'm mentioning. They're like, oh, no, can't be that. Well, let's run a test. Like, let's try something. Do something, anything. And it got to the point that everybody was getting upset with me and yelling at me, which I know is not something that you're supposed to get from medical professionals, but it does happen. And it is a problem in America, at least, where you get yelled at by professionals occasionally. Not all of the time, but when it happens, it's not acceptable. And I got to the point that I did end up breaking down and crying, which of course then somebody's like, oh, it must be a mental health issue. Like, no, just because somebody cries 5 minutes does not mean it's a mental health issue. So basically we went around in this big circle for a week, and then eventually they sent me home. I received no nutrition in the hospital, period. I wasn't able to eat anything. So I didn't receive any meals, didn't receive any nutrient shakes, like I couldn't keep anything in, and everything just kept progressing. The GI that I had at the time that I've mentioned a couple seconds ago did release me because I was too complicated, and unfortunately the timing was just obviously terrible because I couldn't keep in food. I was at the point I couldn't keep in Ensure, I couldn't keep in Boost. We tried all the organic shakes. Nothing was staying in. Vomiting was like nonstop and all these crazy symptoms. So I waited for months, even though I was in this pretty terrible condition, in my personal opinion. I waited months to see a new doctor who wasn't super helpful, but I was just thankful to have another doctor, and he was willing to run some tests, which I thought was a great thing. My nurse and pharmacy and a couple other doctors on my case were pretty upset, and they were pushing for this new guy to do something and do something fast, because at this point I had already lost 50 pounds. And this point, I would say, maybe we're the beginning of September time frame. So from June till September, I lost 50 pounds. And I was still dropping. We were measuring my arm because I had a PICC line. So every couple weeks, my arm was shrinking half a centimeter, a couple more centimeters, and my nurse was obviously very concerned. With the help of another doctor, my amazing endocrinologist, who I love, which I did go behind my doctor's back to get endocrinology because I knew there was a problem with me tapering off steroids. And he's like, oh, no, you don't need endocrinology. And I just got to the point, I was like, look, I think I do. And I went and saw one, which I do highly recommend. If you think something's wrong and you need another specialist and you don't need a referral, go do it, or get your PCP if you have a good one to give you the referral. Just saying. So we were able to get TPN for 3 days, which everybody was so happy about, relieved about. Okay, like we're on the right track, except for by law, the way my insurance is written, it's written the same as Medicare and Medicaid. So I needed a GI signature. Unfortunately, all the GI had to do was say, yes, Victoria has lost weight. She's having trouble eating. Yes, she's under my care for treatment. That's all that he just had to sign, this one piece of paper that said this. He absolutely refused, and they went back and forth trying, like begging him to sign this paper. My insurance, my pharmacy, everybody's calling this guy, and he ignored everybody and then told me that. He's like, yeah, I got everybody's phone calls. You want to see the messages? They left lots of messages. And I was like, and you didn't answer any of them? Nope. Okay then. I was like, well, that's really nice. So needless to say, I did lose my TPN because I needed the signature, and to pay for that out of pocket, it's a few thousand a day. So it is extremely expensive for anybody who didn't know that. So I had to wait for weeks in between every single test, and he only ran 2 tests, but still waiting weeks in between was really, really hard at that point. My upper endoscopy was absolutely hideous, which I did not find out from my doctor. I found out from a practitioner who worked with him, had called me and said, this is the worst upper endoscopy that either I or the doctor have ever seen. There was tons of inflammation, different patches and stuff of inflammation and ulcers. And then they also found, which is pretty gross, old fluid in my stomach from the day before, because they let you drink up until midnight. So I had something to drink, I believe, 9 or 10 p.m. And then the next day they were still able to find that. So that was obviously a sign of that something was up with the GI tract. So a few weeks later, they did do an emptying study, which they make you eat radioactive scrambled eggs, toast, and orange juice. It is absolutely disgusting, and I do know most of us with gastroparesis have an issue with eggs, so I wish that they would find a better way to do this test. I didn't get very far. I had a few bites of stuff, and then, I vomited everything. So they did declare that I did fail the emptying study test, and after fighting with the doctor that there's something wrong, we have the diagnosis of gastroparesis, we should do something about the gastroparesis so that I can eat, get in some sort of nutrition. He finally agreed to let me try a medicine. I am not really sure why he didn't want to try one, to be honest. I just feel like because my case is complicated, that if something were to go wrong, he doesn't want to be blamed, is my theory. But it's just a theory. So he did eventually put me on the medicine, which comes from Canada. It is super helpful. It does help to stimulate appetite, and it does help me to eat. Like, if I forget to take it, I'm in excruciating pain from eating. So that is my gastroparesis diagnosis story. I know that it is kind of long and kind of messy, but I feel like most things with my health are messy and complex. So I say for the most part, all in all, my gastroparesis is controlled as long as I take my medicine. I have to take 2 medications now in order for me to, 2 or 3 medicines in order to keep me eating. Like, this way my body accepts the food and I don't end up vomiting it up or it coming out another way. So typically I've been mildly flaring from everything going on with my gastroparesis, but typically all I'm dealing with is nausea, which sometimes does get pretty intense, I'm not gonna lie, and then the pain. But I'm able to get food in, and I am just so immensely thankful to be able to get food in. Like, you guys, you really don't realize what a gift it is, honestly, to be able to eat and enjoy a meal until you're unable to. Until you're trying to, go out for something or an occasion, or just the family sitting down to eat and you can't be a part of it, and you go for so long without a real meal. You really realize all that you took for granted, and people just take so much for granted, and you see it when you're sick, you just see it, everything is just so different. The world looks different when you're sick, especially when you're really sick. The simple things They're really stuff that we really cherish and we're more, I think, grateful for, because we realize going without it how difficult it can be. So I did hear somebody else say this recently, but I am going to repeat it. If you're able to eat today, really stop for a minute when you're eating and just be thankful. Just do that for me. And I hope that you guys will consider sharing this video. I know I don't really have like pictures or video clips from when I was going through all this. I decided not, honestly, to take a lot of pictures because I was just in such a terrible spot with my health, and emotionally I was in a really, really bad spot from not being able to eat. So, but I would really appreciate if you guys decide to share this video and help us to raise awareness for gastroparesis, because it is a terrible illness and it is something that we have so little research on and so little knowledge about and so few treatments, that raising awareness, it really does make a difference. Have a great day.